Ruthless billionaire's cold heart shatters when he finds his ex giving birth alone. Welcome to Alcott Stories, where every tale unfolds with passion, mystery, and the deepest emotions. Today, we bring you a story that will tug at your heartstrings and keep you on the edge of your seat. Imagine a man so ruthless, his heart was said to be made of stone, until one extraordinary woman changed everything. But what happens when love blooms in the coldest places, only to be shattered by fear and betrayal? And what if fate steps in with a second chance no one expected? Stay with us as we dive into a world of intense romance, unforgettable heartbreak, and the powerful journey of forgiveness and love reborn. Get ready to feel every moment, because this story isn't just told, it's lived. Let's begin. Damien was a man whose very name commanded respect and fear in equal measure, a billionaire whose ruthless reputation preceded him like a shadow darkening every room he entered. His piercing cold blue eyes and chiseled jawline, carved from ambition and steel, a living testament to a life built on power, control, and unyielding discipline. In the world of high stakes and cutthroat business, Damien was untouchable. Revered for his brilliance, yet whispered about in hushed tones for the cruelty lurking just beneath the surface. The unrelenting coldness that shut out all softness, especially love, which he considered a dangerous distraction, a vulnerability that no titan of industry could afford. He wore his heart like armor, impenetrable and cold, because to open it meant risking everything he had fought so hard to build. But all of that changed the moment Amira stepped into his world, a breath of warmth and color in his monochrome existence. Amira was unlike anyone Damien had ever met, a young woman with smooth brown skin that glowed softly even under harsh fluorescent office lights, braided black hair that framed her face with effortless grace, and eyes so deep and soulful they seemed to hold entire galaxies of strength and pain. A quiet fire that refused to be dimmed by the coldness around her. She was sharp-witted, intelligent, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that made it clear she would not be intimidated, even by a man whose very presence could freeze a room. When Damien hired her as his personal secretary, it was a practical decision, but he soon found that her presence unsettled the precise rhythm of his life, the way she moved through the office, the way her voice softened the harsh edges of his daily world, and the way her gaze met his without fear or flinching, breaking down walls he had carefully constructed over years. At first, Damien fought the unexpected pull she created in his chest, burying himself in work and long hours at the office, refusing to acknowledge the stolen glances and the growing tension that simmered just beneath the surface. Yet as days stretched into nights and the city lights flickered beneath the stormy skies outside his penthouse, their conversations deepened beyond the formal and professional, revealing glimpses of the person beneath the suit and the facade. And Amira, too, began to see beyond the ruthless exterior to the man haunted by something he rarely allowed himself to confront. On one fateful night, as thunder rumbled and rain lashed against the tall windows of his secluded penthouse, the storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside both their hearts. And in a moment of vulnerability and longing neither could deny, they finally surrendered to the undeniable connection that had been building between them, a fragile spark igniting into a flame neither dared to name, aloud, but both felt consuming their every thought and breath. That night, with the world outside washed clean by the relentless storm, Damien, the ruthless billionaire, whose heart had always been a fortress, took his first step toward a love that threatened to shatter the walls of stone he had so carefully built. And Amira, with her radiant spirit and fierce heart, became the unexpected beacon of light in his dark, unyielding world. The rain murmured steadily against the towering glass walls of Damien's penthouse, a rhythmic hush that cocooned them from the outside world as flickering candlelight cast golden reflections onto the glossy marble tiles, softening the edges of a space usually sterile and controlled. A fortress meant for power, not passion. the heat of the bathwater wrapped around their bodies like a velvet veil, blurring the lines between tension and surrender as Damien stood still, his breath uneven, his guarded expression slowly unraveling in the gentle glow of vulnerability. For once, the man who commanded empires and destroyed competitors with a single glare was wordless, disarmed not by boardroom pressure, but by the presence of a woman who never tried to conquer him, only to understand him. Amira stood before him, soaked in warmth and softness, her skin dewy with steam, her eyes gleaming not with seduction, but with something far more dangerous, trust. When his fingers, usually stiff with restraint, reached up to sweep droplets from her shoulder, he did so as if she were made of something sacred, his knuckles trembling just slightly, betraying emotions long buried beneath years of calculated detachment. "I've never felt like this," he murmured, the words sounding foreign on his tongue, almost like a confession slipping free after years of silence. Amira's smile was gentle, patient, her breath whispering against his neck as she replied, "Maybe your heart's not made of stone after all." Her voice a balm that seemed to loosen the cold knots around his ribs. And then, without fear, without pretense, their lips met, not in hunger or haste, but with an aching kind of reverence, a meeting of souls that had waited too long to be seen. Her arms wrapped around him slowly, not to hold him in place, but to show him he was safe. And Damien, used to control, felt something unspool deep within him as he allowed himself to be held, his hands cradling her waist not possessively, but protectively, as if terrified the moment might vanish if he blinked too hard. Every touch was new, every breath a shared secret, and as the warm water lapped around them, the silence between kisses told stories no words could carry, of sleepless nights, hidden pain, longings denied, and barriers breaking. The steam painted their skin with a dewy shimmer, their bodies close but never rushed, drawn together not by lust alone, but by a growing need to feel seen, known, and accepted. Damien's mouth traced the line of her jaw with the caution of a man, learning the art of intimacy for the first time, while Amira's fingers slid into his hair, anchoring him not just in the moment, but in her presence. When he rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, voice hoarse with something unfamiliar, he whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing." And her answer, soft and fearless, was, "Neither do I, but we're here." And in that single breath, Damien felt a part of himself unravel, not in weakness, but in freedom, the freedom to feel, to want, to need. Time became meaningless. The storm outside faded into the background as they moved together in slow harmony. Every caress a silent promise, every breath shared in rhythm. When she kissed his scar, the small one by his collarbone, he never spoke about, he flinched. Not from pain, but from being seen too deeply. And yet he didn't pull away. Instead, he drew her closer, pressing her hand to his chest, letting her feel the heartbeat he had hidden from the world. He didn't speak much, but his body learned to say what his words could not, that she was welcome, that she was wanted, that he didn't want the night to end. Amira, for her part, never demanded declarations. Her gaze held no expectations, only quiet understanding. She responded to his tenderness with grace, never pushing, simply allowing. And that acceptance was more powerful than any grand gesture. Hours passed, marked not by a clock but by the deepening of trust. In the afterglow they remained tangled in the bath, her head resting against his shoulder, his fingers idly brushing her arm as though memorizing the shape of her presence. Neither wanted to speak too soon, for fear of shattering the fragile magic that had bloomed in the silence. It wasn't about perfection, it was about the thawing of something long frozen. As she whispered something soft and sleepy into his skin, something he couldn't quite make out but felt deeply, Damien closed his eyes. For the first time in years, feeling at peace. He didn't know what came next. He only knew that this night had cracked open a door he thought he'd sealed shut forever. He wasn't sure he deserved it, but for now, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could. Morning filtered through the penthouse windows like a quiet intruder, golden light spreading across the cooled surface of the now empty marble bath. touching scattered candles and fogged mirrors with a softness that stood in stark contrast to the storm that had passed. But the peace was a lie. Damien sat on the edge of his bed, shirt half-buttoned, jaw clenched, his eyes staring blankly at the floor as if it held the answers to a question he couldn't ask aloud. The warmth from the night before still lingered in the sheets, in the air, in the way her scent clung faintly to his skin. Lavender, soft musk, something utterly her. And yet his chest was a battlefield. Fear, sharp and cold, bloomed behind his ribs. What had he done? He'd let someone in. He had touched tenderness. He had made promises he hadn't spoken, but she'd heard in every heartbeat. Damien Knight didn't do vulnerability. He didn't allow someone to know his darkness and still stay. That was weakness. That was risk. That was exposure. Amira emerged from the bathroom in silence, wrapped in one of his oversized robes, her expression soft with sleep and affection, until she saw his face. He stood abruptly, creating a physical chasm between them, reaching for emotional distance with the same desperation a drowning man reaches for air. "Don't," he said flatly before she could speak, his voice void of the warmth it held the night before. "Damien?" she asked gently, sensing the shift, her fingers gripping the robe tighter, her heart skipping for all the wrong reasons. He turned his back to her, hiding the storm brewing in his eyes, shielding her from the confusion that clutched his throat like a vice. "Last night shouldn't have happened," he said, the words tasting like ash as they left his lips. It was a lapse in judgment, a mistake. Amira stood still, the air suddenly sharp, the distance between them louder than any argument. Her voice trembled, not with weakness but with disbelief. A mistake? He couldn't look at her. If he did, he might crumble. "I don't do love, Amira, you knew that." The finality in his voice was a blade. Her heart, so open just hours before, now splintered into pieces too sharp to hold. Silence fell heavy. No begging, no tears in front of him, just quiet devastation. She nodded once, the kind of nod people give when something deep inside them breaks, and they know nothing will ever be the same. Her pride, regal and unshaken, kept her upright even as her soul cried out. "Thank you for the honesty," she said, voice barely above a whisper, the pain woven into each syllable. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She simply turned, her back straight, shoulders high, and walked away, each step a war against the gravity of heartbreak. He didn't stop her. He told himself it was better this way, that pushing her away was protection for both of them, that loving someone like her would burn him alive. But as the door closed with a soft, final click, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was punishment. She stepped into the hallway, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. But her spine remained straight. She wouldn't let him see her fall apart. Not him, not now. The elevator doors closed around her like the arms of farewell. And in that moment, Amira knew something inside her had changed forever. Meanwhile, Damien stood in the emptiness of his fortress, the echo of her absence louder than anything he had ever known. And for the first time, the empire he had built with iron and stone felt like a prison, not for her but for himself. The months that followed were a cruel symphony of silence, distance, and the aching void Amira had left behind. Yet Damien refused to acknowledge the hollow place gnawing inside him. He buried himself in the cold rhythm of contracts and boardroom battles, each deal sharper than the last. Every late night in a glass tower, another attempt to erase the memory of her laugh, echoing against the marble walls. The warmth of her head resting on his chest, the ghost of her fingers brushing his jaw. But her absence was not a clean wound. It festered, slow and deep in the quiet spaces he used to ignore. He told himself she was better off, safer from the wreckage of his emotional walls. Still, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, he found himself staring out at the city lights, wondering where she was, if she still hummed when she cooked, if she ever thought of him. He never reached out, not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid of what it might cost to admit. He had destroyed something irreplaceable. Then one rain-soaked evening in Savannah, far from the glass towers of New York and the empire he ruled like a fortress, fate delivered its reckoning. The storm had rolled in swift and heavy, rain tumbling like needles from the sky as Damien stepped out of his black car, adjusting his tailored coat against the wind. He had come for a high-profile merger, another crown to add to his collection. But the moment he heard the cry, raw and sharp, everything else fell away. A small crowd had gathered outside a corner shop. Umbrellas scattered, phones raised, voices murmuring in alarm. Something tugged in his gut, a pull, a panic, a premonition. He pushed through the crowd, heart accelerating, drenched to the bone. And then he saw her, Amira, collapsed on the wet pavement, her braids clinging to her face, eyes fluttering in pain. Her body twisted in agony as her arms cradled her swollen belly. His pulse thundered in his ears, his world narrowing to a pinpoint focus. "Amira!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos as he dropped to his knees beside her, unmindful of the cold seeping into his clothes. She turned her head slowly, pain etched into every line of her face, her breath shallow and ragged. But her eyes, God, those eyes locked onto his, not with surprise, but with a fury and heartbreak so fierce it stole the breath from his lungs. "Don't," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Don't act like you care now." Her hands clenched the fabric of her dress, soaked and clinging to her curves, her body trembling as another contraction racked her. "It's your child, Damien," she choked out, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "And I'm doing this alone." For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Everything he had suppressed, denied, buried under ego and fear rose like a tidal wave. The night they shared, the morning he destroyed, the silent months that followed. "You're not alone," he said, but the words felt weak too late, fragile against the storm she had weathered without him. She flinched as another contraction hit, and instinct overtook doubt. He stripped off his coat, wrapped it around her, shielded her from the pelting rain with his own body. "Help is coming," he muttered to a bystander who was already on the phone with emergency services. But Amira's eyes were closing, her lips pale, her breaths shallow. "Stay with me," Damien begged, gripping her hand tightly, the cold reality sinking in. This woman he had pushed away might slip through his fingers entirely. "Please," he whispered, "just hold on." She turned her face toward him, rain mixing with tears, and for a brief moment the anger faded, leaving only exhaustion and something that looked dangerously like love. "You weren't there," she whispered, her voice cracked. "But you're here now. Don't leave again." He bowed his head, forehead resting against her temple, a silent vow made not to the world, but to the woman who had once seen the good in him even when he couldn't. Sirens screamed in the distance, and still he held her hand as if it was the only truth left in the world. The sirens grew louder, but all Damien could hear was the shallow, desperate rhythm of Amira's breathing and the relentless pounding of his own heart as he knelt beside her, soaked in rain, fear, and unspoken regret. Paramedics burst through the crowd, their voices calm and practiced. But to Damien, everything moved in slow motion. Hands lifted her, monitors beeped, gloves snapped into place. Yet Amira's fingers clung to his, refusing to let go even as they tried to separate them. "Stay," she whispered, pain curling around her voice like smoke. "I'm not leaving you," he promised. And for the first time in years, he meant every word without hesitation. In the back of the ambulance, he sat beside her, knees shaking, watching her writhe as another contraction tore through her body. "Breathe, Amira," the medic instructed. Damien gently wiped the hair from her face, murmuring, "You've got this. I'm right here." Her eyes, wild with pain and exhaustion, locked onto his, searching for something real. And what she saw made her tears spill faster than the rain outside. Not pity, not fear, just raw, stripped-down love, broken at the edges. The hospital lights stung his eyes as they wheeled her in, and in the delivery room, time warped into something primal, chaotic, and terrifyingly beautiful. Damien held her hand as she screamed as her body trembled, as her strength shattered and rebuilt itself with every push. "You're doing amazing," he whispered, pressing kisses to her knuckles. "I'm so sorry, Amira. I should have never left. I should have fought for you." She didn't answer, couldn't, but her grip on him never loosened. Sweat beaded on her brow. She cried out in agony, and every sound cut through him like penance. A nurse shouted for a doctor. He heard words like crowning and almost there. He whispered again, "I was a coward. I was afraid of what you made me feel. But I'm not anymore. Please don't shut me out like I did to you." Her scream rose into the air like a prayer torn from her lungs, and then silence. One long, eternal second of stillness. Then the baby's cry pierced the room, high, strong, alive. Damien's knees buckled with relief. Amira collapsed back onto the bed, tears spilling from the corners of her eyes. Her body spent, her soul trembling. The nurse lifted the newborn, still slick and wailing, and placed the baby gently on Amira's chest. She let out a sob, not just from the pain, but from the overwhelming, soul-crushing beauty of it all. Damien stood frozen at the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny life he helped create. A perfect little girl with dark curls and lungs, strong enough to shake his entire world. She's mine?" he asked in a whisper, voice cracking as though saying it aloud might shatter what fragile moment they had. Amira nodded weakly, one hand still gripping his. "Yes, yours," she breathed. And just like that, something inside him gave way. The wall, the coldness, the fortress of denial and fear. It all crumbled. Damien reached out, gently cupping the baby's head, his hand trembling like a leaf in a storm. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Like you." His voice cracked. His knees hit the floor beside the bed, not out of weakness, but because the weight of what he'd lost, what he'd almost missed, crushed him. "I'm sorry," he said again, this time to both of them. "I was afraid, but not anymore. I want to be here every moment, if you'll let me." Amira looked down at him, pain still etched into her face. But now there was something softer behind it, not forgiveness yet, but maybe the start of it. She reached out, brushing his damp hair from his forehead, her fingers shaky but warm. "Then don't run again, Damien, because I won't chase you." He looked up at her, tears finally spilling down his cheeks as he nodded. "I won't, I swear it." And in that sterile room, filled with beeping machines and the cries of new life, Damien Knight, the man the world called Ruthless, broke open, not into pieces but into someone new. The morning light filtered softly through the pale blue curtains of the hospital room, casting long golden beams across the bed where Amira lay, her arms curled protectively around the tiny newborn nestled at her side. The hum of machines, the quiet shuffle of nurses beyond the door, and the muffled beat of a world moving on contrasted sharply with the stillness that had settled between them. Damien hadn't slept. He sat in the same chair he'd refused to leave all night, his eyes never straying far from her, from them, the woman he had shattered and the child who had healed something he didn't know was broken. He had paced. He had cried in silence, and now, as the weight of everything he had run from pressed against his chest like a tide, threatening to swallow him, he couldn't stay standing anymore. Slowly he rose, walked to the side of her bed, and sank to his knees, not out of formality, not from guilt alone, but from the raw, aching need to surrender everything that made him the man she once had to leave. He took her hand in his, kissed the back of it softly, and when she turned to look at him, eyes heavy with exhaustion and dark with memories too sharp to forget, his voice cracked. "I was a coward, Amira," he said. His gaze locked on hers, his throat tight as if the words themselves were blades. "I was terrified of needing someone, of loving someone, and of being loved back. You saw me, really saw me, and I ran. I hurt you. I betrayed the only person who ever offered me something real, without asking for anything in return." Her eyes shimmered, unreadable as she listened. The baby stirred against her chest, cooing softly, and Damien reached a trembling hand to gently touch the infant's tiny fist. "But last night changed everything," he whispered. "Watching you fight through that pain, watching you bring our daughter into this world. I've never felt so small, so powerless, and yet so alive." His breath hitched and his hand gripped hers tighter. "I love you, Amira. I love her. I love what we created. I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the moments. I let fear speak louder than my heart." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at him, truly looked, her gaze dragging over the man she had once trusted, the man who had crumbled her hope and left her to rise from it alone. "Do you mean it, Damien?" she whispered, the question simple, but edged with years of longing and disappointment. "Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear now that you've seen what you left behind?" He shook his head, a tear slipping down his cheek as he pressed his palm flat against her blanket-covered stomach, just inches from the child that had his blood and her soul. "No more lies, no more walls. I mean every word. I don't just want to be a part of her life. I want to earn my place in yours." His voice dropped lower, his forehead pressing against the side of her bed as he knelt lower. "Completely undone. If you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you deserved all along." Silence stretched between them, heavy and sacred. Amira closed her eyes, the exhaustion in her bones warring with the ache in her heart. When she opened them again, something had softened, not forgotten, not entirely forgiven, but changed. She reached out and cupped his cheek, her thumb brushing away the tear that had fallen. "You broke me, Damien," she said quietly. "You left me when I needed you most." He nodded, lips trembling. "I know. But—" She glanced down at the tiny girl, resting against her, then back at him. "You were here when it mattered. You came back, and part of me never stopped hoping you would." The corners of his lips quivered as he leaned into her hand, as if it were the only lifeline holding him above water. "Then let me stay," he whispered. "Let me be hers. Let me be yours." She exhaled slowly, as if years of held breath were finally leaving her lungs. "One condition," she murmured. He blinked. "Anything. No more running." She held his gaze, fierce and fragile all at once. "If you're going to be hers and mine, then you fight. Every time you stay, even when it's hard." His voice broke as he nodded. "Always." And in that fragile morning light, with the scent of antiseptic in the air, and the sound of their child's soft breaths between them, Amira finally allowed her fingers to lace fully with his, not as a promise, but as the beginning of one. Time, like a patient healer, moved slowly between them, weaving threads of fragile hope, where once only broken promises and shattered trust had lain. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, each moment a silent battle to rebuild what had been torn apart. Each glance a cautious step toward forgiveness. Damien learned to listen, not just to words, but to the quiet spaces between them, to the trembling vulnerability in Amira's gaze, to the unspoken pain that still lingered beneath her fierce exterior. Amira, in turn, found the courage to lower her walls, to let him see the scars his absence had carved into her soul, and to witness the genuine remorse etched on his face. They weren't perfect. The past lingered like a shadow, reminding them of the cost of fear and pride. Yet love, true, relentless, stubborn love, endured through the sleepless nights and whispered apologies, through the laughter of their daughter, who had become the living proof of their broken yet healing bond. On a radiant afternoon, bathed in the golden glow of late spring, the world seemed to pause just for them. White lilies swayed gently in the warm breeze, filling the garden with their sweet, pure fragrance, a quiet witness to the beginning of something new. Amira stepped forward, radiant in a gown of shimmering gold that caught the sunlight with every measured step. Her baby cradled tenderly in her arms, their daughter, a living testament to survival, hope, and love reborn. Her eyes locked onto Damien's, eyes that had once been cold and unreachable, but now glimmered with something softer, something raw and real. He stood waiting at the altar, the ruthless billionaire stripped of his armor, replaced by a man humbled and reborn through love's fierce grace. The guests around them held their breath, caught in the sacred moment when two hearts mended by pain dared to beat as one. The baby gurgled softly between them, a joyful sound that rippled through the air like a promise. Damien's hands, once used to command empires with unyielding force, now shook gently as they reached for Amira's, a silent vow spoken in the tender touch. When their lips met beneath the setting sun, it was not a kiss of fleeting passion, but a sealing of vows, of promises made and kept, of a future forged in fire and forgiveness. Tears traced down his cheeks, not a sign of weakness, but the release of years spent. Hiding behind a heart of stone, in that moment, surrounded by blooming lilies, the echoes of pain and fear were replaced by the quiet power of love restored. They had fallen apart and found each other again, stronger, deeper, forever. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of amber and rose, Damien, Amira, and their daughters stood together, not as fragments but as a whole, a family bound by courage, trust, and the unbreakable promise of forever.